The first gunshot of the night split the air like summer lightning as Penelope Wilson stumbled through the doors of Yates Sinclair's ranch house, clutching her bleeding shoulder and collapsing onto his kitchen floor. It was April 1878 in Silverdale, Wyoming territory, and Penelope had just killed a man for the first time, the same man who'd been hunting her across 3 states with promises of making her pay for leaving him at the altar. Penelope hadn't expected to find salvation in a stranger's kitchen, nor had Yates expected to find a wounded woman bleeding onto the floorboards he'd laid with his own hands just 2 summers prior. His young daughter Emily, only 8 years old, screamed at the sight of blood, while his 10-year-old son Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, clutching a wooden toy horse their mother had carved before consumption took her 3 years ago. "Help me," Penelope whispered, her golden brown hair falling from its pins as she struggled to remain conscious. "Please." Yates didn't hesitate. With calloused hands that had broken horses and built fences, he lifted the stranger and carried her to the bedroom that had been empty since his wife Sarah's passing. "Papa, who is she?" Thomas asked, his voice small but steady as he followed behind his father. "Someone who needs our help," Yates replied, his voice gruff from years of limited conversation. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to speaking only when necessary, mostly to his children and occasionally to the handful of ranch hands who helped manage his modest cattle operation. Outside, hoofbeats approached and then receded into the distance, riders passing by the isolated ranch house. Penelope's eyes flew open in terror. "They're looking for me," she gasped. "No one's taking you anywhere," Yates promised, though he had no idea who they might be or why they were pursuing this woman. All he knew was that his instinct to protect had roared to life the moment she'd stumbled through his door. After Yates cleaned and bandaged her wound, a flesh wound that had bled profusely but wouldn't prove fatal, Penelope drifted into an uneasy sleep. He settled into a chair beside the bed, rifle across his lap, watching her face in the flickering lamplight. Her features were delicate but determined even in unconsciousness, with a small scar above her right eyebrow and calluses on her hands that told of a life of work. By morning, fever had taken hold of Penelope. She thrashed in the bed, muttering about a man named Victor and begging someone named Clara to run. Yates sent Thomas to fetch Dr. Bennett from town, a journey of almost 2 hours on horseback. In the kitchen, Emily tugged at her father's sleeve. "I'm hungry, Papa." Yates looked at his daughter helplessly. Since Sarah's death, meals had been simple affairs: beans, bacon, bread that grew harder by the day. Neither he nor the children had the skills for proper cooking, and the ranch hands fended for themselves. "Let me try," came a weak voice from the doorway. Penelope stood there, swaying slightly, her face pale beneath her tan. "You need to rest," Yates insisted, moving to support her. "I need to earn my keep," she countered, "and your children need a proper breakfast." Despite Yates's protests, Penelope made her way to the kitchen. With his reluctant assistance, she managed to prepare a meal from the meager supplies in the pantry, biscuits light as air despite the rough flour. Eggs with herbs she found growing neglected outside the kitchen window, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, just the way Yates preferred it. When Emily took her first bite, her eyes widened in wonder. "It tastes like when Mama was here," she whispered. Thomas nodded solemnly, shoveling food into his mouth as if afraid it might disappear. Yates said nothing, but something shifted in his chest as he watched his children eat with enthusiasm for the first time in years. Dr. Bennett arrived mid-morning, a grizzled man who'd served as a surgeon during the war. He examined Penelope's wound with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky, Miss Wilson. The bullet passed clean through. Keep it clean and you'll heal fine." He peered at her over his spectacles. "Now, would you care to explain how you came by this injury?" Penelope glanced at Yates, who stood in the doorway. "I was engaged to Victor Chambers back in Missouri," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "When I discovered he was involved in bank robberies and worse, I broke it off. He didn't take it well, said no woman leaves Victor Chambers, especially not after learning his secrets." She took a deep breath. "I fled west, he followed. Last night he caught up to me in town. I'd been working at the hotel kitchen, saving for a ticket further west. He cornered me after my shift." Her eyes hardened. "I had a derringer. My father insisted every woman should carry one. When Victor put his hands on me, I shot him. I don't know if he's dead, but his friends were nearby. I ran. Your ranch was the first place I saw with lights still burning." Dr. Bennett exchanged a look with Yates. "Victor Chambers," the doctor said slowly. "That explains the commotion in town. A man was brought to my surgery last night, but I was out delivering the Jensen baby. My assistant patched him up. Shoulder wound, not fatal. His companions claimed it was a hunting accident." Penelope closed her eyes briefly. "Then he's still alive and looking for me." "No one comes onto my land uninvited," Yates said, his voice like iron. "You're safe here while you heal." Dr. Bennett packed his bag. "The wound needs daily cleaning. I'll return in a week, sooner if there's fever or discharge." At the door, he paused. "Chambers and his men paid for a week at the hotel, said they're cattle buyers." He snorted. "Never seen cattle buyers with so many guns or such hard eyes." After the doctor left, Penelope insisted on preparing lunch despite her weakened state. "Cooking calms me," she explained as she kneaded dough for fresh bread. "And I need to keep busy or I'll start thinking too much about Victor finding me." Yates watched her capable hands work, remembering how Sarah had done the same, humming as she cooked. But where Sarah had been soft and gentle, Penelope moved with a determined efficiency, as if each task completed was a small victory against unnamed forces. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked, breaking his customary silence. Penelope smiled faintly. "My mother ran a boarding house in St. Louis. I was in the kitchen from the time I could stand on a chair to reach the counter. When she died, I took over until my father sold the business." Her smile faded. "That's where I met Victor. He was a guest, charming and handsome. I thought his irregular hours were because he worked as a cattle broker." "I was a fool." "You were betrayed," Yates corrected. "There's a difference." For 3 days, Penelope recovered in the Sinclair home, cooking meals that brought color back to the children's faces and a reluctant warmth to Yates's guarded heart. She told stories during dinner, not fairy tales, but practical accounts of her travels west, edited for young ears but honest enough that Thomas and Emily listened with rapt attention. On the 4th day, Yates returned from checking fences to find Penelope in the yard, hanging laundry with Emily's help despite her injured shoulder. The domesticity of the scene struck him with unexpected force, his daughter laughing as Penelope showed her how to properly pin a sheet to prevent wrinkles, the afternoon sun catching in both their hair. "You should be resting," he said, dismounting. "I've rested enough," Penelope replied. "Besides, your daughter is an excellent assistant." Emily beamed at the praise, an expression Yates hadn't seen in far too long. That evening, after the children were asleep, Yates found Penelope on the porch, staring at the stars. "I should leave tomorrow," she said without preamble. "I've imposed long enough and Victor won't stop looking." "Where will you go?" Yates asked, settling beside her on the rough-hewn bench. "California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere I can start fresh where no one knows me." Yates was silent for a long moment. "The children will miss your cooking," he finally said, the words inadequate for what he meant. Penelope smiled sadly. "I've written down some recipes for you, simple ones that even Thomas can manage with supervision." "Stay," Yates said abruptly, "at least until you're fully healed. I can pay you as a cook and housekeeper. The ranch is turning a profit this year, and the children—" He trailed off. "Need a woman's touch," Penelope supplied. "Need you," he corrected, surprising himself with the admission. "You've brought something back to this house that's been missing since Sarah died. Not just good meals, but—" He gestured vaguely, unused to expressing such thoughts. "Life," Penelope finished softly, their eyes met in the darkness, an unspoken understanding passing between them. "What about Victor?" she asked. "Let him come," Yates said, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "This is my land, my home." The next morning, Penelope didn't pack her few belongings. Instead, she rose early and prepared breakfast, moving around the kitchen as if she'd always belonged there. When Yates entered, she handed him coffee without comment, but the look they exchanged held the weight of decisions made in darkness. A week passed, then two. Penelope's wound healed cleanly, leaving a puckered scar she regarded with grim satisfaction. A reminder, she told Yates one evening, of what happens when you trust the wrong person. And of how strong you are, he countered. Dr. Bennett brought news from town with each visit. Victor Chambers and his companions had departed after 10 days, reportedly heading north toward Montana Territory. Penelope didn't fully believe he'd given up so easily, but as days passed without incident, she allowed herself small moments of hope. Spring brought new calves to the Sinclair ranch and fresh challenges. When two of Yates's ranch hands quit to seek their fortunes in the gold fields, the remaining work fell heavy on his shoulders. Penelope watched him return each evening exhausted, his hands raw and his eyes shadowed with fatigue. One evening in late May, as Yates sat at the kitchen table after the children were asleep, Penelope placed a glass of whiskey before him and took the seat opposite. "I can do more than cook," she said directly. "I grew up helping my father with his business ledgers. I can manage accounts, order supplies, even negotiate with the merchants in town so you don't have to leave the ranch as often." Yates looked skeptical. "This is hard country. Town isn't always welcoming to a woman alone." "I crossed half a continent alone," Penelope reminded him. "I can handle Silverdale's general store." The next day, she rode to town with a list of supplies and Yates's reluctant permission. The stares that followed her through the streets confirmed her suspicions. Gossip traveled faster than horses in small towns, and her presence at the Sinclair ranch had not gone unnoticed. At Wilcox's general store, the proprietor's wife eyed her with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the woman staying out at Sinclair's place," Mrs. Wilcox said as she filled Penelope's order. "Folks are talking." "Folks usually do," Penelope replied evenly, examining a bolt of calico fabric. The children needed new clothes. Emily had grown nearly an inch in the short time Penelope had been with them. "He's a good man, Sinclair," Mrs. Wilcox continued, wrapping parcels in brown paper. "Been through a hard time since Sarah passed, those poor children." She paused meaningfully. "A man shouldn't raise children alone." Penelope met the older woman's gaze directly. "No, he shouldn't. Children need stability and care." She added the fabric to her order. "And good meals." Mrs. Wilcox's expression softened slightly. "Sarah was my niece, you know. Watched her grow up, saw her fall in love with Yates even when her father disapproved of a man with no family connections." She tied the final package with string. She'd be pleased the children are being looked after. At the mercantile next door, Penelope was selecting coffee beans when a shadow fell across the counter. She turned to find Sheriff Miller behind her, his weathered face unreadable beneath his mustache. "Miss Wilson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Heard you'd taken up residence at the Sinclair place." Penelope's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm working for Mr. Sinclair as cook and housekeeper while his children need care." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Had some inquiries about a woman of your description." "Man named Chambers asking questions over in Laramie." Her fingers tightened on the counter. "Is that so?" "Told them I hadn't seen anyone fitting that description," the sheriff continued. "Don't much care for men who chase women across territories." His eyes were knowing. "Whatever happened back east stays back east, far as I'm concerned, but you should know Chambers has friends in low places." "Thank you for the warning," Penelope said quietly. "Sinclair's a respected man in these parts," the sheriff added. "Keeps to himself but fair in his dealings. Does right by his ranch hands." He adjusted his hat. "Would be a shame if trouble found him because of another's quarrel." The implication was clear. On the ride back to the ranch, Penelope weighed her options. The sensible choice would be to leave, to continue west before Victor found her and brought danger to Yates and the children. But the thought of leaving brought an unexpected ache, not just for the children who had begun to look at her with trust, but for their father, whose rare smiles had become something she found herself working to earn. Yates was repairing a corral when she returned. He straightened as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. At 32, his face was weathered from years in the sun, lines etched at the corners of his eyes, but his gaze was clear and direct as he looked at her. "How was town?" he asked, taking the reins of her horse. "Informative," Penelope replied. "Victor's been asking about me in Laramie." She related the sheriff's warning as they walked toward the house. Yates's jaw tightened. "You're thinking of running again." It wasn't a question, but Penelope answered anyway. "I should. I won't bring trouble to your door after all you've done for me." They reached the porch where Penelope's packages waited to be unpacked. Yates stopped, turning to face her fully. "My wife died because I couldn't save her," he said bluntly. "Watched her waste away day by day, powerless to stop it. I won't be powerless again, not with you." Penelope felt something crack inside her chest, the hard shell of self-reliance she'd built since fleeing Missouri. "This isn't your fight. You cooked for my family," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion rarely displayed. "You brought life back to this house. You made Emily laugh again." He stepped closer. "That makes it my fight." That night, after a dinner where Penelope had outdone herself with a berry pie that had Thomas asking for thirds, Yates found her in the kitchen, washing dishes by lamplight. "I've been thinking," he said, picking up a towel to dry the plates she handed him. "The ranch needs improvements if we're going to expand the herd next year. The house, too, it's too small for a growing operation." Penelope raised an eyebrow. "Planning to build an empire, Mr. Sinclair." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Planning for a future, one where my children have opportunities I didn't. They're lucky to have a father who thinks ahead." Yates set down the plate he was drying. "Penelope." He rarely used her given name, and it caught her attention. "I'm asking if you see a place for yourself in that future." The directness of the question startled her. "We've known each other barely 2 months. And in that time you've saved my sanity, improved my children's lives, and given me reason to think beyond the next season." Yates's gaze was steady. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet, but I am asking you to consider making your position here permanent, regardless of when Chambers gives up his search." Penelope's hands stilled in the soapy water. "The town already talks. It will talk more if I stay indefinitely without." She let the implication hang. "Let them talk," Yates said. "I've never lived my life according to town gossip and won't start now." In June, the first letter arrived from Victor. Addressed simply to Penelope Wilson, Silverdale, Wyoming Territory. It found its way to the Sinclair Ranch via a reluctant postal clerk who'd been given a description of Penelope by a most insistent gentleman. Yates brought it to her while she was teaching Emily to make butter, her hands guiding the child's on the churn. "You don't have to read it," he said, offering the envelope, but Penelope knew better. Knowledge was protection. She opened it while Yates took over the butter making with Emily. "My dearest Penelope," Victor had written in his flowing script. "Did you think distance would sever what fate has joined? You belong with me, as you well know. I forgive your moment of panic, even the bullet you put in my shoulder. A woman's temperament is naturally excitable. But this game of chase must end. Return to me willingly, and I'll overlook your transgression. Continue to hide behind your cowboy protector, and I cannot promise his children will remain unaffected by our dispute." The threat, thinly veiled, made Penelope's blood run cold. She showed the letter to Yates after the children were asleep. "He's bluffing," Yates said, but his hand strayed to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. "He wouldn't dare harm children." "You don't know him," Penelope replied. "There were rumors back in Missouri. A family that crossed him in business, their barn mysteriously burned with their horses inside. Nothing proven, but—" She shook her head. "Victor believes anything he wants belongs to him forever, including me." That night, Yates doubled the watch on the ranch, instructing his remaining hands to report any strangers approaching the property. He cleaned his revolver at the kitchen table, methodically checking each chamber before loading it. "I should go," Penelope said, watching him. "Meet him somewhere away from here, end this." Yates's head snapped up. "That's not happening. I won't risk Emily and Thomas, and I won't send you to a man who hunts you like an animal." Yates's voice was low but intense. "There are other solutions. Like what? We go to the law." Sheriff Miller already knows something of your situation. With a written threat against children, he'll have cause to act. But when they rode to town the next day, they found the sheriff skeptical despite the letter. It's vague enough, Miller said after reading Victor's words. No direct threat I could take to a judge, and frankly, Miss Wilson, without knowing the full circumstances of your disagreement with Chambers, my hands are tied. The full circumstances, Penelope repeated flatly. You mean you need to know if I'm the kind of woman who deserves protection? The sheriff had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not what I said. It's what you meant, Yates interjected. Sheriff, I've known you 5 years. When Rollins tried to claim my east pasture, you stood with the law, not with the man with the deeper pockets. I'm asking you to do the same now. Miller sighed. I can send telegrams, alert nearby jurisdictions to watch for Chambers, but without charges filed, there's little else I can do officially. He leaned forward. Unofficially, I'd suggest you both watch your backs. And maybe consider whether Miss Wilson's continued presence at your ranch is wise, given the circumstances. The ride back to the ranch was tense with unspoken words. It was Penelope who finally broke the silence as the house came into view. He's right, you know. My presence puts your family at risk. Yates's response was immediate and firm. You are part of this family now. The children need you. He paused, then added more quietly, I need you. The admission hung between them, weightier than any previous words. That evening, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first real storm of summer, Yates and Penelope sat on the porch watching the lightning dance across distant mountains. The children were inside, Thomas reading to Emily from one of their mother's books. I never thanked you properly, Penelope said suddenly. For what? Taking in a bleeding stranger. You could have sent me away or taken me to town. Instead, you brought me into your home. Yates was silent for a moment. When Sarah was dying, she made me promise something. She said, don't let grief make you hard. The children need softness in their lives. He looked at his calloused hands. I wasn't doing a very good job of keeping that promise until you arrived. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. Sarah sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. She was. Yates turned to look at Penelope directly. And so are you, in an entirely different way. She grew up sheltered, the daughter of a successful merchant. Life's hardships came as a shock to her, but you faced them head-on and emerged stronger. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the porch roof. I should check the windows, Penelope said, rising. Yates caught her hand. Penelope! The urgency in his voice stopped her. Whatever comes, whatever Chambers attempts, we face it together. Promise me you won't try to handle this alone. She looked down at their joined hands, his son browned and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. I promise, she said softly, and meant it. The storm that night was magnificent, wind howling across the prairie and rain drumming against the roof with such force that it woke the children. Penelope found Emily in the hallway, clutching her rag doll and trembling with each crash of thunder. Come, Penelope said, lifting the child. Let's make a special place to watch the storm. In the main room, she built a nest of blankets near the fire, arranging pillows in a circle. Thomas joined them, trying to appear brave but flinching at particularly loud thunderclaps. Yates watched from the doorway as Penelope transformed the children's fear into excitement, teaching them to count between lightning and thunder to gauge the storm's distance. My father taught me that storms are just the sky's way of cleaning itself, she told them. All that noise and fury just to make things fresh again. When the children finally drifted to sleep, curled together in their blanket nest, Yates sat beside Penelope before the dying fire. You're good with them, he observed. They make it easy, she replied. They're good children. They weren't always after Sarah died. He shook his head. Thomas stopped speaking entirely for months. Emily had nightmares every night. I was barely holding us together. Penelope hesitated, then placed her hand over his. Grief does that, fractures everything. What brought you back? After your mother died, necessity, the boarders still needed to be fed, the rooms cleaned, and my father. She sighed. He retreated into his work. Someone had to maintain the household. You never had time to be a child. Not much, she agreed, but it prepared me for what came later. When you have to run, knowing how to support yourself matters. Yates turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers. You don't have to run anymore. The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, broke something open inside Penelope. Tears she'd held back for months through fear and flight, through pain and uncertainty, finally fell. Yates drew her against his chest, her head tucking beneath his chin as if the space had been made for her. I'm afraid, she admitted into the solid warmth of him. Not just of Victor, but of this, of caring for you and the children. Everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me or betrayed me. Not everyone, Yates said, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. Not us. In July, the territory celebrated Independence Day with unusual enthusiasm. Even the isolated Sinclair ranch participated, with Penelope preparing a picnic feast and Yates reluctantly agreeing to take everyone into town for the festivities. The children should experience a proper celebration, Penelope insisted when he expressed reservations about leaving the ranch vulnerable. And we can't live in fear forever. The town square had been transformed with bunting and banners. A makeshift platform held local dignitaries making patriotic speeches, while tables groaned under potluck contributions from area families. Emily was wide-eyed at the spectacle, while Thomas immediately spotted friends from his infrequent school attendance. Can I go play? He asked, bouncing on his toes. Yates nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd. Stay where I can see you. As the children raced off, Mrs. Wilcox approached with a determined expression. Miss Wilson, Mr. Sinclair, she greeted them. I'm collecting entries for the baking contest. Penelope, I've heard from reliable sources that your apple pie is the best west of the Mississippi. Penelope laughed, relaxing slightly. I'm afraid I didn't bring a pie today, Mrs. Wilcox. Next year, then, the older woman said with a meaningful glance between Penelope and Yates. I expect you'll be a permanent fixture by then. Throughout the afternoon, similar exchanges occurred. Townspeople who had previously eyed Penelope with suspicion now included her in conversations, invited her to join the ladies' quilting circle, asked her opinion on preserving the summer's bounty. It was as if some invisible threshold had been crossed. Her presence at the Sinclair ranch was no longer scandalous but anticipated to become permanent. They've decided we're courting, Penelope murmured to Yates as they watched a sack race. Aren't we? He replied, his eyes still on the children but a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The directness of the question caught her off guard. We haven't discussed it in those terms. Yates turned to her then. Would you like to discuss it in those terms? Before Penelope could answer, a commotion near the refreshment tables drew their attention. A man was arguing loudly with Sheriff Miller, his voice carrying across the square. I know she's here, the man insisted. Penelope Wilson, dark blonde hair about this tall, scar above her right eye. Penelope froze. Even at this distance, she recognized Victor Chambers's voice. Yates's hand went immediately to her lower back, a steadying pressure. Stay calm, he murmured. The sheriff knows the situation. Indeed, Miller was deliberately positioning himself between Victor and the crowd, one hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. Mr. Chambers, the sheriff was saying, as I've told you repeatedly, I cannot compel a free citizen to meet with you against their will. If Miss Wilson is indeed in my jurisdiction and wishes to avoid your company, that is her right. Victor's face contorted with anger. He was still handsome in the conventional way that had first attracted Penelope, tall and well-dressed, with carefully groomed dark hair and a mustache waxed to precise points. But now she saw only the coldness in his eyes, the cruelty in the set of his mouth. That woman is my fiancé, Victor declared loudly, clearly intending to be overheard. She shot me in a fit of hysterics and fled. She's unwell, Sheriff. I'm concerned for her safety. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Penelope felt eyes turning toward her, evaluating this new information against what they thought they knew. We should leave, she whispered to Yates. I don't want a confrontation with the children present, but it was too late. Victor's gaze swept the gathering and locked on Penelope with the intensity of a predator sighting prey. His face transformed, a smile spreading across his features that never reached his eyes. "Penelope," he called, shouldering past the sheriff. "My darling, I've been so worried." Yates stepped slightly in front of Penelope, his posture relaxed but alert. "That's close enough," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed on his own land. Victor stopped, assessing Yates with a dismissive glance. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. This is between me and my future wife." "Former fiancé," Penelope corrected, finding her voice, "as I made clear when I returned your ring." "A momentary misunderstanding," Victor said smoothly. "One we can discuss privately." His gaze hardened. "Or would you prefer I share certain details of your family's financial improprieties with your new friends? Your father's creative bookkeeping, perhaps?" Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. Her father had indeed taken liberties with client funds during difficult periods, though he had always replaced the borrowed amounts. Victor had discovered this vulnerability and used it to pressure her into accepting his proposal. "That's enough," Sheriff Miller intervened, moving between them. "This is a public celebration, Mr. Chambers. Take your personal matters elsewhere or spend the night in my jail for disturbing the peace." Victor smiled thinly. "Of course, Sheriff, I apologize for the disruption." He looked directly at Penelope. "We'll continue our discussion another time, my dear. I'm staying at the hotel, room 6. I expect to see you there by tomorrow noon." With a tip of his hat that managed to be both polite and threatening, he turned and walked away. The remaining festivities were ruined for Penelope. Though she maintained a calm facade for the children's sake, inside she was churning with fear and anger. Victor's appearance confirmed her worst fears. He would never stop pursuing her, never accept her rejection. As they rode home, Emily fell asleep in the wagon, exhausted from the excitement. Thomas sat quietly, glancing occasionally at Penelope with worried eyes. "Is that bad man going to take you away?" he finally asked. Penelope exchanged a look with Yates. "No, Thomas, no one is taking me anywhere I don't want to go, but he said you were supposed to marry him." "I was," Penelope admitted. "But I changed my mind when I discovered he wasn't a good person. We're allowed to change our minds about important decisions when we learn new information." Thomas considered this. "Like when I thought I wanted to be a train conductor, but then decided I want to run the ranch with Pa instead." Penelope smiled despite her anxiety. "Exactly like that." That night, after the children were asleep, Yates and Penelope sat at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee between them despite the late hour. "He won't give up," Penelope said. "You saw him. This isn't just about wanting me back, it's about winning, about ownership. And he's not above using the children to pressure me." Yates's face was grim. "You're not meeting him tomorrow. I have to end this somehow. Not by putting yourself in his power." Yates ran a hand through his hair. "There's another option, one that would make his claims meaningless." Penelope looked at him questioningly. "Marry me," Yates said simply. "Not just for protection, though that would be part of it. Marry me because these past months have shown me that what started as kindness to a stranger has become something more, because the children love you. Because he stopped, swallowed, then continued with determined honesty. "Because I love you, Penelope. Not in the desperate way of a drowning man clutching at salvation, but in the steady way of a man who sees his future clearly for the first time in years." Penelope stared at him, her heart pounding. "Yates, you don't have to answer now," he added quickly. "And if your answer is no, nothing changes. You still have a place here for as long as you want it, but if your answer might be yes." His eyes held hers. "Think about it, please." The next morning, Penelope woke before dawn, her mind made up. She dressed quickly and moved to the kitchen, where she began preparations for a breakfast more elaborate than usual. By the time the household stirred, the table was laden with hot biscuits, preserved peaches from last summer's canning, fresh eggs, and thick slices of ham. Emily's eyes widened at the spread. "Is it someone's birthday?" "No," Penelope smiled. "But I hope it might be a different kind of special day." Yates entered last, his expression cautious as he met Penelope's gaze. She nodded slightly, and something in his face eased after breakfast. While the children helped clear the table, Penelope took Yates aside. Yes, she said simply. His eyes searched hers. You're certain this isn't just because of Chambers? Victor is the reason I ran, Penelope acknowledged. But you and the children are the reason I stayed, the reason I want to stay permanently. Yates's smile was slow but transformative, erasing years of worry from his features. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength in his fingers. When? Today, Penelope said decisively. If we ride into town now, we can speak to Reverend Collins before Victor expects me at the hotel. Yates nodded. I'll have Thomas help me hitch the wagon. He hesitated. Penelope, I meant what I said last night. This isn't just about protection. I know. She squeezed his hand. Neither is my answer. They were married that morning in the small white church on the edge of town, with Thomas and Emily as their only witnesses. Reverend Collins raised an eyebrow at the urgency, but asked no questions beyond those required for the ceremony. Penelope wore her best dress, a blue calico with lace at the collar, while Yates had hastily brushed his Sunday coat and polished his boots. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows taking on special significance for a woman who had fled false promises and a man who had already buried one wife. When Reverend Collins pronounced them man and wife, Yates kissed Penelope with restrained tenderness, mindful of the children watching wide-eyed beside them. Does this mean we call you Ma now? Emily asked as they signed the marriage certificate. Penelope knelt to the child's level. Only if you want to and only when you're ready. Until then, you can still call me Penelope. Thomas, more reserved, studied her with serious eyes. Pa smiles more since you came, he finally said, and your biscuits are even better than Ma's were, though don't tell her I said so. It was as close to approval as the boy could offer, and Penelope accepted it with equal seriousness. They had just exited the church when Victor Chambers appeared at the bottom of the steps, two men flanking him. His eyes took in the scene: Penelope's flowers, Yates's formal attire, the children's excited faces, and narrowed dangerously. How touching, he said, his voice like silk over steel. A hasty wedding to thwart my rights. Yates moved slightly in front of his family, his hand not quite reaching for the revolver at his hip. Mr. Chambers, as you can see, your business with my wife is concluded. Wife, Victor repeated, the word twisting in his mouth, a convenient fiction. Tell me, Cowboy, did she share the full truth about her past, about her father's embezzlement, about the men she entertained at the boarding house? I know everything I need to know, Yates replied evenly. Penelope stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Yates's arm. It's over, Victor. Whatever you thought existed between us is finished. Go back to Missouri. Find someone who actually wants your attention. Victor's face darkened. You think marriage to this rancher protects you, that I'll simply walk away after you humiliated me, shot me. I think, said a new voice, that you're creating a disturbance outside a house of worship. Sheriff Miller approached from the street, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Furthermore, you're threatening a newly married couple in the presence of children. This is a private matter, Sheriff, Victor began. Not anymore. Miller nodded toward the church steps. Reverend Collins is a county official. That marriage is legal and binding. If you continue to harass Mrs. Sinclair, you'll answer to territorial law. For a moment, Victor seemed poised to argue further. Then, with visible effort, he composed his features into a bland smile. Of course, my congratulations to the happy couple. His gaze locked with Penelope's, cold and promising. I'm sure we'll meet again. As Victor and his companions walked away, Penelope released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Yates's arm came around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. Thank you, Sheriff, he said. Miller nodded. Congratulations to you both, though I admit I'm surprised by the suddenness. When you know, Yates replied, with such simple conviction that Penelope felt a rush of warmth despite the lingering fear Victor's appearance had caused. They spent the rest of the day in town, sharing a celebratory meal at the hotel restaurant, a rare treat for the children, and purchasing a length of blue ribbon that Emily insisted her new mother needed. By unspoken agreement, neither Yates nor Penelope mentioned Victor's threats. This day belonged to their new family, not to old fears. That evening, after the children were asleep in their room, Yates and Penelope stood awkwardly in the bedroom that had once been his and Sarah's, and had temporarily been Penelope's during her recovery. "I can sleep in the main room," Yates offered, his usual directness faltering. "Until you're ready for more." Penelope shook her head. "We're married, Yates, in the eyes of the law in the town." She stepped closer to him. "And while our arrangement may have begun with practicality in mind, I think we both know it's grown into something else." Yates's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of me was finished. And I never expected to trust a man again after Victor." Penelope turned her face to press a kiss against his palm. "Yet here we are." Their first kiss as husband and wife in the privacy of their home was different from the chaste one they'd shared in the church deeper, with the promise of a future neither had dared imagine months before. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Penelope's head pillowed on Yates's chest, he spoke quietly. "Chambers won't give up easily." "I know," she sighed, "but neither will we." "I've been thinking," Yates continued, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "The ranch is doing well this year, well enough to hire more hands, improve the house. Your empire-building plans," Penelope teased gently. "Our plans now," he corrected. "What would you think about building a proper kitchen, one with enough space for you to teach Emily all your cooking secrets?" Penelope smiled against his skin. "I'd like that." They fell asleep making plans for expanded gardens, for proper schooling for the children, for a future that stretched beyond the immediate threats and challenges. It was the sleep of people who, despite knowing danger still lurked, had found something worth protecting together. In the following weeks, Victor Chambers remained in Silverdale, taking rooms at the hotel indefinitely and making his presence known throughout town. He made no direct approaches to the Sinclair ranch, but was frequently seen talking with merchants who supplied the ranchers, asking casual questions about the territory's property laws, and occasionally riding along the public road that passed near Sinclair land. "He's looking for weaknesses," Penelope observed one evening after hearing from Mrs. Wilcox that Victor had been asking particular questions about the water rights to Sinclair Creek, which ran through the eastern edge of the ranch. "Legal vulnerabilities he could exploit." Yates nodded grimly. "I've already spoken to Judge Harmon about ensuring our titles are secure. Had them reviewed when I first homesteaded, but it doesn't hurt to check again." As July ripened into August, Penelope settled more deeply into her role as Yates's wife and the children's stepmother. The initial awkwardness of the new family arrangement gave way to comfortable routines, morning lessons for the children before the heat of the day, Penelope's expanding garden yielding fresh vegetables for the table, evening readings on the porch as the summer sun lingered in the western sky. Work began on the expanded kitchen, with Yates and his ranch hands laying a new foundation and framing walls that would double the size of the cooking space. Penelope worked alongside them when the children were occupied, her capable hands driving nails with practiced precision. "Where did you learn carpentry?" Yates asked, watching her measure and cut a board with competent ease. "The boarding house was always needing repairs," Penelope explained, "and hiring workmen was expensive. My father taught me the basics." She smiled, a private expression that appeared more frequently these days. "He said a woman should know how to build things as well as cook, and so be prepared for any circumstance," he used to say. "Wise man," Yates observed, passing her another nail. "In some ways," Penelope agreed, her smile fading slightly. "In others." She shook her head. "He meant well, but his business ethics were flexible." It was the closest she'd come to discussing the allegations Victor had made outside the church. Yates set down his hammer, giving her his full attention. "You don't have to tell me," he said, "but if you want to, I'm listening." Penelope drove one last nail before setting her hammer aside. "My father borrowed from client accounts when the boarding house was struggling. He always meant to repay it and usually did, but..." She sighed. "Victor discovered the discrepancies, used them to pressure me into accepting his proposal, said he'd keep my father out of prison if I agreed to marry him. Blackmail, Yates said, his voice hardening. Yes. When I discovered the extent of Victor's own illegal activities, I realized the hypocrisy of it all. He was using my father's relatively minor infractions to force me into marriage while himself involved in far worse. She met Yates's eyes directly. I left a letter for the county prosecutor before I fled, detailing what I knew of both men's activities. I don't know if anything came of it. Yates took her hand, his calloused thumb rubbing across her knuckles. Thank you for telling me. Does it change how you see me? Penelope asked, the vulnerability in her voice revealing how much the answer mattered. Only to make me prouder of your courage, Yates replied. Standing against both your father and Victor couldn't have been easy. The moment was broken by Emily's excited shouts as she ran from the house, waving a letter. Mail came, and Thomas's birthday order from the catalog finally arrived. Life continued in this pattern of domestic contentment underscored by vigilance. Yates never rode the boundaries of his property alone, always taking at least one ranch hand with him. Penelope taught the children to be alert for strangers, framing it as a game rather than frightening them with the truth of the danger Victor posed. In early September, as the first hints of autumn crispness touched the morning air, the confrontation they had been bracing for finally came. Penelope was alone at the house, Yates having taken the children to town for supplies and to visit the doctor for Thomas's persistent cough. She was in the newly completed kitchen, the pride of the expanded house, preparing dough for the evening bread when she heard a horse approach. Through the window, she saw Victor dismounting alone, his city clothes exchanged for more practical riding attire. The sight of him sent ice through her veins, but Penelope refused to show fear. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the door, her father's derringer tucked into her pocket. "You're not welcome here, Victor," she called from the porch, not descending the steps to his level. He removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Is that any way to greet an old friend, Penelope, especially one who's come with valuable information? We have nothing to discuss." "Oh, but we do." Victor's smile was sharp. "I've just received word from Missouri. Your father was arrested last week. Fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of client funds. He's facing 10 years in the state penitentiary." Penelope gripped the porch railing, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "If that's true, then he'll face justice for his actions." "Justice can be negotiated," Victor countered smoothly. "I still have connections in St. Louis, influence with the right people. One word from me and the charges could be reduced, perhaps even dismissed." "In exchange for what?" Penelope asked, though she already knew the answer. "Come back with me," Victor said, taking a step toward the porch. "End this charade of a marriage. Your cowboy can file for annulment. I'm sure the good people of Silverdale would understand once they learned the circumstances. The circumstances being your lies and manipulation." Penelope's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "No, Victor, I made my choice. I'll help my father if I can, but not by returning to you." Victor's face hardened. "You think I don't know about your letter to the prosecutor? The only reason you're not facing charges yourself is that I intervened. Accessories to fraud don't fare well in court, Penelope." "Is that a threat, a reality?" Another step closer. "Your father protected you, now it's your turn to protect him." Penelope felt the weight of the derringer in her pocket. "My father made his choices, as did I, as did you. Now I'm asking you to leave my property." "Your property," Victor laughed. "This sad little ranch in the middle of nowhere. You could have had everything with me, status, security. A life befitting your intelligence and beauty." "I have everything I need here," Penelope replied. "A husband who respects me, children who love me, work that matters." Victor's expression darkened. "Love, respect. Pretty words that won't keep you warm when winter comes, and your cowboy can't make the mortgage payment on this worthless piece of land." "What are you talking about?" A smile spread across Victor's face, satisfaction evident in his eyes. "Did you really think I'd come all this way without a plan? I've purchased the note on this property from the Territorial Bank. Your husband is now indebted to me." Penelope felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "You're lying." Ask your husband about the loan he took 3 years ago to expand his herd after his wife died. Ask him who holds that note now. Victor replaced his hat. You have 1 week to reconsider my offer, Penelope. After that, I'll be forced to call in the loan. I wonder how your newfound family will feel when they're homeless because of your stubbornness. With that parting shot, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Penelope shaking with rage and fear on the porch. When Yates returned with the children an hour later, he found Penelope sitting at the kitchen table, her bread dough abandoned, her face pale with shock. What happened? He asked immediately, sending the children to put away the supplies with a quiet word. Penelope told him about Victor's visit and his claim about the loan. Yates's expression grew increasingly grim as she spoke. Is it true, she finally asked, about the mortgage? Yates sank into a chair across from her. Yes. After Sarah died, I needed to expand the herd to make the ranch profitable enough to support the children. The Territorial Bank held the note until recently when they sold a bundle of loans to an investment company back east. His eyes met hers. I had no idea Chambers was involved. He said he'll call in the loan if I don't return to him, Penelope whispered. He'll take the ranch, Yates, everything you've built. Yates reached across the table to take her hands. Let him try. We'll fight this, Penelope, together. How? We don't have the money to pay off the loan at once, and no bank will refinance with Victor holding the note. There are other options. Yates's voice was determined. Judge Harmon has been helping me investigate Chambers since he arrived in Silverdale, the sheriff too. They've been making inquiries about his business dealings back east. If he's as crooked as you believe, there will be evidence. That could take months, Penelope protested. We don't have months, we have a week. Then we'll buy time. Yates squeezed her hands. Trust me, Penelope. I didn't build this ranch, this life, to lose it to a man like Chambers, and I certainly won't lose you to him. The next day, Yates rode to town alone, returning with Judge Harmon and Sheriff Miller. The three men spent hours in discussion at the kitchen table while Penelope kept the children occupied with lessons and chores. That evening, after the visitors had departed and the children were asleep, Yates explained their strategy. Judge Harmon believes we can challenge Victor's acquisition of the loan on legal grounds, he said. At minimum, it will delay any foreclosure proceedings for weeks, possibly months. Meanwhile, the sheriff has sent telegrams to his counterparts in Missouri and other territories where Chambers is known to have operated. They're building a case against him for fraud and extortion. Penelope nodded, relieved to have a plan but still fearful. What about my father? The judge is looking into that as well. If Victor's claims are true and your father has been arrested, we'll find out what evidence exists and whether Victor truly has influence over the proceedings. Yates took her hand. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The week passed in a haze of tension and preparations. Yates met with neighbors, securing promises of support should Victor attempt to physically claim the ranch. Penelope continued her daily routines with determined normalcy for the children's sake, while privately inventorying their resources and making contingency plans. On the morning Victor's ultimatum expired, Penelope rose before dawn to find Yates already awake, sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his revolver. You should take the children to the Wilcox farm today, he said without preamble, just as a precaution. Penelope shook her head. No. My place is here with you. Besides, Victor wants me, not the ranch. If I'm not here, there's nothing stopping him from simply taking what he wants by force. Before Yates could argue, hoofbeats sounded in the yard more than a single rider. Through the window, they saw Victor approaching with 3 men, all armed, their expressions grim in the early morning light. Stay inside, Yates instructed, buckling on his gun belt. Get the children to the back room. But Penelope was already moving to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. This is my fight too, she said, checking that the weapon was loaded. It has been from the beginning. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. With a short nod, Yates moved to the door while Penelope roused the children and hurried them to safety. Victor and his men had dismounted by the time Yates stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground in a show of restraint. Chambers, he acknowledged coldly. You're trespassing. Victor smiled, unperturbed by the weapon. On the contrary. As of today, I believe I own this property, unless, of course, you're prepared to pay the note in full. He produced a document from inside his coat. $1,500, Mr. Sinclair, due immediately. Yates didn't flinch. Judge Harmon filed an injunction yesterday contesting your acquisition of the loan. Until the territorial court rules on the matter, the property remains mine. For the first time, Victor's confident demeanor wavered. An injunction on what grounds? Fraud, came Penelope's voice as she emerged from the house to stand beside Yates. Coercion, harassment, take your pick, Victor. The judge found sufficient evidence to warrant a full investigation. Victor's eyes narrowed. And where is this supposed injunction? I see no official notification. That would be here, announced Sheriff Miller, riding into the yard with 2 deputies. He held up a document bearing the territorial seal. Court order preventing any seizure or transfer of this property pending judicial review. He dismounted, handing the paper to Yates before turning to Victor. Mr. Chambers, I'm also serving notice that you're wanted for questioning in connection with multiple fraud investigations across 3 territories. Victor's face darkened with rage. This is absurd, a transparent attempt to delay the inevitable. He looked at his men. Take the house. But his companions hesitated, eyeing the sheriff and deputies warily. I wouldn't, Miller advised calmly. Interfering with a court order is a serious offense, as is threatening a lawful property owner on his own land. For a tense moment, the outcome hung in balance. Then Victor laughed, the sound brittle and forced. Very well, play your legal games, it changes nothing in the end, his gaze fixed on Penelope. I still have your father's fate in my hands, remember that. Actually, the sheriff interjected, we received a telegram this morning from the St. Louis Police Department. It seems Mr. Wilson has already agreed to testify against several associates in exchange for reduced charges. Your name featured prominently in his statement, Mr. Chambers. The color drained from Victor's face. He wouldn't dare, he knows what I'm capable of. As do the authorities now, Miller replied. I'd suggest you depart Silverdale immediately, Mr. Chambers. Your presence is no longer welcome, and my jurisdiction extends only so far. Once you leave it, I cannot guarantee your safety from other lawmen who might be interested in your activities. For the first time since Penelope had known him, Victor appeared genuinely rattled. His careful facade of control cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. This isn't over, he spat, turning to remount his horse. No one makes a fool of Victor Chambers. You managed that quite effectively on your own, Penelope replied steadily. With a final venomous glare, Victor and his men rode away, dust settling in their wake. Only when they were out of sight did Penelope's composure falter, her hands trembling as Yates pulled her into his embrace. Is it really over? She whispered against his chest. Not completely, Sheriff Miller answered, folding the injunction papers carefully. The legal battles may take months, but Chambers won't risk returning here, not with what we've uncovered about his operations. Too many jurisdictions are interested in him now. Later that day, after the sheriff had departed and the children had emerged from their hiding place, life gradually returned to normal on the Sinclair ranch. Penelope baked a celebratory cake, while Yates declared a holiday from chores, taking Thomas fishing at the creek that bordered their property. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Yates put his arm around Penelope's shoulders. I've been thinking, he said. About the future. Penelope leaned into his warmth. What about it? When this is all settled, when the loan is resolved, and Chambers is no longer a threat, I want to take you on a proper honeymoon. Denver, maybe, or even San Francisco. The idea of traveling for pleasure rather than necessity brought a smile to Penelope's face. I'd like that. Though who would manage the ranch? Cook for the children? Mrs. Wilcox has offered to stay with them, says it's time she taught Emily proper pickling techniques anyway. Yates's fingers traced idle patterns on Penelope's arm. We could go in the spring after the calving season. The casual way he spoke of future seasons, of plans extending months ahead, filled Penelope with quiet joy. For so long, her life had been measured in days of survival, in the distance she could put between herself and Victor. Now, suddenly, she could imagine years unfolding, watching the children grow, the ranch prosper, her marriage to Yates deepening with each shared challenge and triumph. "Spring sounds perfect," she agreed, turning to kiss him softly. In October, word reached Silverdale that Victor Chambers had been arrested in Denver, attempting to flee to Mexico. The charges against him included fraud, extortion, and conspiracy related to numerous schemes across the Western Territories. Judge Harmon informed Yates that the loan on the ranch would be returned to the Territorial Bank with reasonable terms for repayment. Penelope received a letter from her father, writing from the St. Louis jail where he awaited sentencing. His plea arrangement had reduced his potential sentence to 3 years, and he expressed genuine remorse both for his financial improprieties and for his role in pressuring Penelope toward Victor. "I hope someday to meet the man who has given you the security and happiness I failed to provide," he wrote, "and to thank him for being stronger and more honorable than I managed to be." As autumn deepened toward winter, the expanded Sinclair house became a warm haven against the increasingly bitter winds. The new kitchen proved its worth as Penelope prepared elaborate meals for Thanksgiving and Christmas, teaching Emily the family recipes she had inherited from her mother. Thomas's cough finally subsided after Dr. Bennett prescribed a regimen of steam treatments and willow bark tea. The boy grew stronger, taking more interest in the ranch operations and following Yates everywhere, absorbing knowledge about cattle and land management with an eagerness that made his father proud. "He's becoming quite the rancher," Penelope observed one evening as they prepared for bed. "Takes after his father." Yates smiled, the expression coming more easily to him these days. Sarah would be pleased. She always said he had a feel for the land, even as a baby. The mention of his first wife no longer brought shadows to his eyes. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, a way of honoring her memory without being haunted by it. Penelope understood this evolution better than most, how the past could be acknowledged without allowing it to poison the present. "I have something to tell you," she said, sitting beside him on the edge of the bed. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain of before sharing." Yates looked at her inquiringly. "We're going to have a baby," Penelope said, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Dr. Bennett confirmed it when I saw him in town yesterday." For a moment, Yates sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, with gentle reverence, he placed his hand over hers. "A baby," he repeated, wonder filling his voice. "Our baby." Penelope nodded, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Due in early summer, the doctor thinks." Yates gathered her into his arms, his embrace careful as if she had suddenly become fragile. "Are you happy about this?" He asked against her hair. "Very," Penelope assured him, though also a little terrified. "It's been a long time since I've been around an infant." "We'll manage together," Yates promised, "as we've done with everything else." They decided to wait until after Christmas to tell the children, wanting to savor the news privately for a while. But when the day came to share their secret, the reaction was everything they could have hoped for. Emily immediately began planning all the things she would teach her new brother or sister, while Thomas adopted a serious, protective air toward Penelope that was both touching and slightly comical coming from a 10-year-old. As winter settled fully over Wyoming territory, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine white expanse, the Sinclair Ranch entered a season of peaceful anticipation. The threat of Victor Chambers had receded into memory, replaced by the promise of new life and continued growth. "It's strange," Penelope mused one night as she and Yates lay in bed listening to the wind outside. "If I hadn't been running from Victor, I never would have found you, never would have stumbled into your kitchen that night." Yates drew her closer, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her abdomen. "And if Sarah hadn't made me promise to keep the door unbarred for travelers in need, I might not have opened it. We found each other because of the worst moments in our lives," Penelope realized. Out of loss and fear came something beautiful. Something meant to be, Yates agreed. Though I could have done without Chambers's attempts to reclaim you, Penelope laughed softly. Every good story needs a villain, I suppose. And a happy ending, Yates added, kissing her with tenderness that still held the promise of passion. Definitely a happy ending. In April 1879, almost exactly a year after Penelope had first stumbled bleeding into the Sinclair kitchen, spring returned to Wyoming territory. The fields greened, calves wobbled alongside their mothers, and the expanded kitchen garden Penelope had planned during the winter months began to sprout with promising vigor. Preparations for the new baby occupied much of the household's attention. Yates built a cradle from timber harvested on their own land, while Emily and Thomas helped Penelope prepare the small room adjacent to the master bedroom that would serve as the nursery. "Were you scared when I was born?" Thomas asked his father one evening as they sanded the cradle to a smooth finish. Yates considered the question with his usual thoroughness. "Yes," he finally admitted, "terrified, but also filled with more hope than I'd ever felt before." Thomas nodded sagely. "That's how I feel about the new baby, scared but excited." Yates ruffled his son's hair, a gesture of affection that would soon be rejected as the boy grew older but was still accepted now. "That's exactly right, son. The best things in life often come with a measure of fear." When June arrived, bringing with it the relentless heat of the High Plains summer, Penelope's time drew near. Dr. Bennett visited regularly, pronouncing her healthy and the baby properly positioned. Mrs. Wilcox moved into the spare room to assist with household management as Penelope's energy waned in the final weeks of pregnancy. "You've done wonders with this place," the older woman commented as they sat shelling peas on the porch one afternoon. "When Sarah died, I feared Yates might follow her from grief. The ranch was barely functioning and the children were like ghosts." She patted Penelope's hand. "Now look at it all, the house expanded, the ranch thriving, those children happy as larks." Penelope smiled, shifting to find a more comfortable position. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I found such happiness after everything that happened." "That's the way of things," Mrs. Wilcox said with the wisdom of her years. "Life has a way of balancing accounts eventually. You endured your share of hardship, and now you're receiving your due measure of joy." The baby arrived on a sweltering night in late June, after a labor that tested even Penelope's considerable strength and endurance. Yates paced the porch while Mrs. Wilcox and Dr. Bennett attended the birth, Thomas and Emily having been sent to stay with neighbors to spare them the anxiety of the waiting. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the night air, Yates stopped mid-stride, his breath catching in his throat. Minutes later, Mrs. Wilcox appeared at the door, her face weary but wreathed in smiles. "Come meet your daughter, Mr. Sinclair," she invited. "Both mother and child are doing splendidly." Penelope lay propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant as she cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she had spent the winter knitting. She looked up as Yates entered, a smile of such pure joy on her face that it struck him like a physical force. "She has your eyes," Penelope said softly, lifting the bundle slightly. "Come see." Yates approached with reverence, carefully settling beside his wife on the bed. When she placed their daughter in his arms, he felt the same overwhelming surge of love and protection he'd experienced with Thomas and Emily. Yet somehow new and different, this child being both his blood and Penelope's, a living symbol of their union. "She's perfect," he whispered, studying the tiny face with its rosebud mouth and unfocused blue eyes. "What shall we name her?" Penelope had given this much thought during the long months of waiting. "I was thinking Sarah," she said carefully, watching his face. "To honor her memory, and because without her teaching you compassion for strangers, I might never have found a home here." Tears filled Yates's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "Sarah," he repeated, testing the name against the reality of the newborn in his arms. "Sarah Hope Sinclair." "Hope," Penelope echoed. "Yes, that's perfect." 2 days later, Thomas and Emily returned home to meet their new sister. Emily was immediately enamored, hovering constantly beside the cradle and begging to help with every aspect of the baby's care. Thomas was more reserved but equally fascinated, especially by Sarah's tiny fingers that would curl tightly around his offered thumb. As summer progressed into a glorious autumn, life at the Sinclair Ranch settled into new rhythms accommodating their youngest member. Sarah proved to be a content baby, with her father's thoughtful gaze and her mother's determination already evident in her infant features. In October, a letter arrived bearing the return address of the Missouri State Penitentiary. Penelope recognized her father's handwriting and opened it with trepidation, Yates at her shoulder offering silent support. "He's being released early," she announced after scanning the contents. "Good behavior and his testimony against Victor and others. He'll be free by Christmas." She looked up at Yates, uncertain. "He's asking if he might meet you and the children." Yates considered this. "Do you want to see him?" "I don't know," Penelope admitted. "Part of me does. Another part fears opening old wounds." "He's your father," Yates said simply. "And Sarah's grandfather. Family is complicated, but it's still family." In the end, they invited Harold Wilson to visit in the spring, when travel would be easier and Sarah older. His reply expressed gratitude for the opportunity and a desire to make amends for his past failings. As December blanketed the ranch in snow once more, the Sinclair family prepared for their second Christmas together. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red berries gathered by the children, while Penelope baked traditional treats from her childhood that filled the expanded kitchen with mouth-watering aromas. On Christmas Eve, after the older children had finally gone to bed vibrating with excitement for the morning, Yates and Penelope sat before the fire in the main room, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. The moment held a perfect contentment, the warmth of the hearth, the security of their home, the family they had built together from unlikely beginnings. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Yates said quietly, gazing at his infant daughter's face. "After my first Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that the best I could hope for was to raise the children properly and maintain the ranch." Penelope rested her head against his shoulder. "And I never believed I would trust enough to love again, not after Victor." "It's strange to think how close we came to never finding this," Yates mused. "If you hadn't been running, if I hadn't opened the door that night, if I hadn't insisted on cooking for your family even while injured," Penelope added with a smile. "The best decision I ever made," Yates said, turning to kiss her gently, "was letting you take over my kitchen." "And I never left," Penelope finished, returning his kiss with one of her own. "Never will." Outside, snow began to fall, fresh flakes coating the world in pristine white, covering the old, making way for the new, just as time had smoothed the jagged edges of their past hurts and allowed new joy to flourish in their place. In the quiet of their home, surrounded by the family they had forged through courage and love, Yates and Penelope Sinclair had found what so many seek but few truly discover: not just a happy ending, but a happy beginning that would unfold day by day, season by season, challenge by challenge, joy by joy, for all the years to come. The girl who had once cooked for a cowboy's family out of necessity had found a permanent place not just in his kitchen, but in his heart and home. And in that place, she had discovered not merely safety from the dangers that had pursued her, but the profound gift of belonging to this land, to these children, to this man who had opened his door to a stranger and in doing so, opened the way to a future neither of them could have imagined alone.